Senator from Tennessee.
Thank you, Madam President. September 11th, 2001 is a date that is seared in the memories of those of us who lived through that day and experienced the trauma and the fear of that day. What has always struck me about that day and the days following, even standing here 20 years later, is how the entire free world, they stood united against what we saw as a common threat. It came to us as naturally as breathing. We understood that as witnesses to mass murder, we shared a duty to avenge those who had died. It may have been fear that forced us together, but in the days that followed the attacks, we as Americans rediscovered the ties that have bound us for centuries and solidified our faith in the common cause of freedom. But the more time that passes between each September 11th and the September 11th attacks, the more obvious it becomes that history slips away from those who fail to heed its lessons. The defensive action we took as a nation in the wake of the attacks was among the most forceful and effective the world had ever seen. But still, even 20 years later, it is obvious that our work in Afghanistan and the Middle East is far from over. Now, my colleague from Maine talked about the withdrawal from Afghanistan. And I would say that as I talk to Tennesseans, it is not withdrawing from Afghanistan. It was the manner in which the Biden administration chose to end the military mission in Afghanistan that didn't seem to reflect the reality of what was going on the ground. Last week, I sent a letter to Chairman Reed with several of my colleagues on the Armed Services Committee asking for formal hearings on the withdrawal. We need to know exactly what happened, how they were advised. Without sworn testimony from Secretary Austin, General Milley, General McKenzie, and General Miller, we will never be able to untangle the chaotic course of events that led to the deaths of 13 service members in Kabul and the abandonment of an unknown number of American citizens and our Afghan partners. Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that the letter be entered into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. But beyond the fact-finding mission, I plan to use these hearings to impress upon my Democratic colleagues the importance of the words that we use to describe our enemies, how we talk about them, how we frame their actions. Since day one of this administration, the Biden administration has used their words to rehabilitate the Taliban in the eyes of their radical base. The problem, of course, is that their diplomatic calls for inclusivity and equality, this supports a lie about who the Taliban actually is. The Taliban, like ISIS, like Al-Qaeda, it's a terrorist organization. They rule by fear. They rule through public beheadings, rape, forced marriage, brutality against anyone who questions their regime, against anyone who disagrees with them. Look at the way women and children are treated. Now, in my opinion, and from a lot of Tennesseans that I have talked with as I've been home, they feel that expecting terrorists to behave like normal people is reckless and stupid. And they feel that some of the actions that have come from this administration and comments that they would have that expectation would reflect that reckless stupidity. These are terrorist organizations. If you need another example of this, just look at their approach to border security. Even before the transfer of power, massive migrant caravans had begun moving out of Central America and toward the southern border. They were eager to take advantage of then candidate Biden's promises of open borders and amnesty for all. Where did that get us? Well, this is what we have learned. The CBP reports that migrant encounters along the U.S.-Mexico border reached a 20-year high in July. That is right. Massive numbers. They heard those promises. So what did they do? They got to work contacting a cartel, and they made this journey. After, of course, they paid the cartel. Most of the nearly 200,000 people our Border Patrol caught in July were traveling alone. Families might be holding back, but the international traffickers certainly are not holding back. On August 29th, CBP officers in Memphis found 3 kilograms of ketamine in a shipment of furniture from France, coming in because of the cartels. In the first week of September, CBP officers in Texas seized 2 separate caches of cocaine with a combined street value of almost $300,000. In the month of July alone, cocaine seizures increased 91%. And meth seizures increased 20%. Why are they doing this, Madam President? They know that the border is open. On September 8th, Texas state troopers and CBP officers stopped 2 human smuggling attempts running just hours apart from each other. Our CBP officers have made it standard procedure to scour remote terrain for migrants who have been abandoned and left to die by their cartel transporters. And why is this happening? Because it's obvious to everyone, from the migrants, the cartels, to the foreign officials who refuse to police their own borders, that the Biden administration won't do anything to stop it. Tennesseans see this as reckless. It makes no sense. I talked to some local law enforcement officers this week. They're seeing an uptick in meth, fentanyl, heroin on the streets, all coming out of Mexico. They repeatedly say, secure the border. Madam President, we live in the greatest nation on earth. We are still the world's best example for freedom, and we are the last hope for millions of people suffering under authoritarian rule. It's important to understand that it doesn't have to be the way it has been. When you look at this withdrawal from Afghanistan, when you look at this open border, when you look at the fact that, yes, this year, the Border Patrol, they have apprehended terrorists at the southern border. That's right. Doesn't have to be that way. But when you have weak leadership, leadership that is not focused, leadership that says it's my way or the highway, when you have that reckless disregard for the truth, that can and will destroy us. The actions of the Biden administration have already emboldened our enemies. They've made our allies doubt our commitment to them and to the work that they are trying to do to advance freedom for themselves, the work that we are doing to advance freedom here in this country and abroad. So I would encourage my Democratic colleagues to resist the urge to fall in line with the White House on the issue of the Afghanistan withdrawal, and to instead join me in demanding as many hearings as it takes to restore accountability and transparency, to find out exactly what happened. What were our military advisors saying to President Biden, Vice President Harris, to Jake Sullivan, to Susan Rice, to Anthony Blinken? What were they telling them? What was the expectation? Did they have a plan? Did they plan to leave Americans behind enemy lines? Did they plan to give up Bagram Airfield? Did they plan to leave all of the equipment for the Taliban to use? Did they plan on that? Was it intentional that they made those decisions? Or was it reckless stupidity that got us here? I yield the floor.